Oh, hey there. Welcome back to the Red River Horror Podcast. This is episode number 62. I am, of course, Joe Zakreski, and I am all by myself right now, but that's because this episode's going to feature an interview. Eddie's going to interview Andy Garrison, who was the voice behind Rock and Roll Nightmares, Gory Days, 80s edition short stories. If you remember our previous interview for the 70s edition, Eddie had an interview with Andy Garrison about this one with the 80s. So it should be really cool. You got to check those out. They're available on Amazon. You can print. I did audio for 70s. I'm going to do audio for the 80s, and I really enjoyed it, especially for this Halloween season. Other things I enjoy are retro and collectibles, and at KeystoneRetro.com, you can get 10% off your order by using code Red River. Now, let's sit back and relax and enjoy Eddie's interview with Andy Garrison.
Welcome back to the Red River Horror Podcast. I'm Eddie Cayazzo, founder of Red River Horror. We have another great interview for you. Of course, we call it the Channels of Fear on the website. This would fall under the audio streams. And today we have a special book being featured, Gory Days, the Rock and Roll Nightmares series from the 80s. That's right. And we have the narrator on the line with us today, Andy Garrison. Andy, welcome to the Red River Horror Podcast.
Thanks, Eddie. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I want to dive right in to your background. It's kind of funny. Like I was, you do a little bit of research and you kind of look up, who you're going to be talking to and what they do. But I honestly, I have to say, you have a full suite, I guess, there in Kansas City for, I guess, acting, voice acting, the whole shebang. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, sure. My day job really is running an acting studio. It's a fairly small boutique operation, one location, one instructor, me, and that keeps me pretty busy through the week. Once in a while, I get to take an acting gig. Audiobooks are great because I can work on audiobooks in my own time. And instead of having to be at a rehearsal or a film set and lose class time to do that, I can fit the audiobook recording in the cracks, so to speak. And Kansas City is actually, a lot of the country may not know this, it's a pretty good acting market. We have a ton of theater. I think we're top 3 in the nation in terms of per capita equity theater seats. And, for the size of the metropolitan area, which is about 2.1 million, we have a lot of theater going on. We also have a thriving independent film community.
Yes.
Pretty good commercial acting market. And that's all before you get to the stuff actors do on their own, like audiobooks and other commercial voiceover work and so forth.
So that's very cool. I never would have thought. Obviously, when I think of Kansas City, of course, I think of the Great Barbecue.
Sure. We got that.
Yep. And then your beloved Chiefs, think of them.
Yeah.
But I would never think of that being like a big acting market. But hearing you say that, like I think, because obviously on the East Coast, we know how much Atlanta has blown up, and that's become a hub.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're getting affected by the blow up right now in Oklahoma. They've just started some tax credits down there that's attracting some film down into Tulsa and Oklahoma City, and we have actors and some shooters and things like that are getting some work in Oklahoma. We're not a large market. We're what I would call a tertiary market at best, but it's enough so that there are, plenty of actors that can do this for a living primarily. And while we may not have as much competition, for certain roles, there also isn't as much opportunity as like in LA. You're going to have tons of opportunity, but you're also going to have tons of competition. And here, the quality of the work is good, but it's all on a smaller scale. And mixing that with the cost of living here in the Midwest, and a lot of actors have come to Kansas City from the coasts and found out, wow, I could buy a home here and raise a family and have kind of a normal life,
Right. A little bit different. Yep.
The comfort factor is a draw for this area, and the older you get, the more that you appreciate that.
Yeah, so. I'm sure. So that's your day job, I guess. Then I'm trying to think. Is there? I want to try and get into your head a little bit with that.
It's
just
a scary
because
place, but
we try and well, that's what we try and do. Trying to get into scary places here at RedRiverHorror.com. No, but it's I know last year we had Jeffrey Reddick on. He's the creator of the Final Destination series, and he broke into the business as a writer, and then he's produced a lot of films and now has directed as well.
Sure.
But it was funny hearing his story of, he wrote something, he just kept being persistent with New Line Cinema until ultimately he got in. And then he said, if you're doing this, then you got to be all in. You got to be all in. So that's what you do. How does it differ, I guess, if you were trying to be a voice actor from a regular actor? What I mean, I know that those are two very different things, but I'm trying to think of the audition process. Some people think this is a great example. I had someone say to me this next statement, and I'm just like, well, I'm going to be talking to a voice actor and someone who teaches this. They think it's easier to get into voice acting than it is to regular acting.
There are aspects that are easier. With voice acting, you have the copy right in front of you. You don't have to memorize, minutes and minutes and minutes of dialogue. You can read it. That, on the other hand, is its own challenge. Being able to read out loud and sound like you're just talking, like these thoughts are coming out of my head instead of the writer's head who put them on paper. That is its own skill. And the ability to read out loud is, I think, underestimated for a lot of different professions, not just voice acting. I think the ability to, speak publicly with a presentation and, have your own notes and be reading those notes, but speak as though it's spontaneous is a skill. And your cold reading skills become very, very important. I get calls as a voiceover teacher and acting teacher. I must get, half a dozen calls a month from some guy with great pipes, I get told every day I should be on the radio. And great. You don't need a great voice. You need a great read. And sometimes those guys can read, and women, I should say as well, that can read beautifully. Other times it's more work than some want to put in. And that's before you even get to the technical aspects of recording yourself, editing your audio, and having a place that's quiet enough that you can record from. There are a lot of different aspects to this. And I think you are, in a certain way, more in control of what you can do as a voice actor, because with the interwebs, we can get out there and find work in a lot of different places, not just in our market. And of course, actors often have to travel for their work, even if they're stage actors, certainly film actors, and find the work that way. But as a voice actor, you can find the work out there and sit at home in your home studio and get the job done. So it feels like there's a little more control. I feel like as a commercial voiceover actor, I feel more dependent on my agent here in Kansas City than I do as an audiobook narrator. I feel like as a narrator, I can go out and find the work myself, whether it's through some of the platforms like ACX, or there's a new one called Ahab, or finding small publishing houses that have that publish the kind of genre I want to work in, and being able to contact them and authors through that publishing house website. That's a terrific way to find work.
Okay, so that would, I guess, bring me to the getting work part of it, and actually doing it. You teach it, but you bring up something very important. How did you come to read Gory Days?
Well, it was really serendipity. I got contacted by Stacey Lane Wilson, the author and editor, and author of many of the stories in Gory Days. She, a couple of years ago, asked me to narrate a full-length novel of hers called The Tragedy Man. Tragedy Man is about a novelist, a struggling novelist that who's I'm going to screw this up, who becomes possessed while he's writing, and the work that comes from that possession is much more successful than anything he had written before. And it sort of follows his meteoric rise and then meteoric fall through that process. And of course, it's Stacey Wilson, so it's scary and funny,
right,
at the same time. So she contacted me, said, "I think you might be a good voice for this," based on my profile on ACX, Amazon's audiobook creation exchange.
Yes,
and I auditioned for her. She said, "Yep, sounds good. Let's do this." And then a couple of years later, she came back to me for Gory Days. So she's a pleasure to work with, by the way, I want to say.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, that's funny. So she actually found you. So that's
she was kind of browsing through narrator demos on ACX and found my voice, and that didn't put her off. She contacted me anyway. So,
well, no, that's funny. And you bring up something very important as well. Yes. One thing I noticed about the Rock and Roll Nightmares books, this one being Gory Days, the 80s edition, which will be available on audiobook very, very soon. There is a sense of course, there's a horror element and there's some creepy things, but some of it is pretty funny.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. There have been plenty of times that I had to cut on a take because I was cracking up, and it's like, when I was reading this to myself ahead of time, it made me laugh, but I didn't remember it was that funny, and I'd get to it out loud and have to stop and redo it. So that's happened several times in a lot of the stories that Stacey put together.
Yep. So just to name some of the stories in Gory Days, you have Don't Stand So Close to Meat, Hip to Be Scared, and Dead Over Heels. So I have to ask, in the book, there's multiple stories. Which one is the scariest to you?
Oh, the scariest. I would say Don't Stand So Close to Meat. The very first one is pretty scary.
Wow.
It's the story. It's narrated. The narrator is a personal chef for a rock and roll musician who, I don't want to give too much away, but she forms an attachment that's a little too close for anybody. And she is, like I said, the personal chef, and she wants to be more personal than just chef. So there's some things that happen in that story that creeped me out quite a bit. Let's see. There's one called, I'm going to forget the titles because there's so many of them, but there's one that has a girl band from the 80s that are about to make it, and they're on the verge of it, and they kind of get their set at a theme park kind of gets overrun by some how should I put this? Some teenage zombies is the best way to put that. And what they have to do to get out of there, I think they get out of there.
And we'll find out.
It's pretty scary.
Yes.
And but there's also some funny stuff as well. It's kind of a unique trait of Stacy's, the way she mixes the horror and the comedy. It really is.
I agree, only because being a horror fan, and the host of this program, the Red River Horror Podcast, Joe Zakreski, he and there's a contingent of horror fans that enjoy the horror comedy, like that kind of subgenre.
Yeah.
I am not a huge fan of that. I will be completely honest. I'm not a huge fan of horror and comedy. I either want to be scared or I want to laugh. I don't like when two mix. But I also hadn't seen it done so well until much, much later in life.
Yeah.
So like when I was younger, it's just like, well, this isn't like, I don't understand why this is good. Like something, I'm trying to think of like a movie that just was really, really bad, and it was like a horror comedy, like Thanksgiving. I'll bring that one up. Like that was just terrible. But like seeing the last few years, for me at least, there's a movie called The Final Girls. That was a horror comedy. That was really good. Tucker and Dale vs. Evil. That was done really well, and it was funny. And I've noticed that with the Rock and Roll Nightmares series. Yeah. I at first, like, I'm just like, okay, so this has some comedic tones, and then you start listening more, and you get brought into the books more and into the different stories, and it's like, oh, that's kind of funny. I like that. Yeah.
Well, and it starts with some of the titles, as you mentioned, Don't Stand So Close to Meat, Hip to Be Scared, which is my favorite because it's probably the funniest to me. About a couple of modern kids that get magically teleported back to 1983 on a bet. And they think they're going to handle 1983 just fine. And all of they are as much disturbed by the violent aspects of it. Or I should say they are as much disturbed by the other aspects besides the violence of 1983, like aerosol sprays and political incorrectness.
Oh no!
My goodness, this was pre-Me Too, and they get pretty freaked out by that.
They're coming from a woke world to an unwoke world, right?
Exactly, and it's. That's probably the one that I had to stop the most on. But there's I think the one about the girl band in a park is called, it may be called Pour Some Sacrificial Blood on Me. And my apologies, Stacey, if I'm getting that wrong, but there's the characters are very distinct and a lot of fun. And as a narrator, you love the distinct characters because you got to do a lot of different things with your voice to make sure everybody knows who's talking.
Sure.
Yeah. It's one of the great things about audiobooks because as a character actor, you get to go out there and, my bad imitation of, I don't know, Sylvester Stallone may not sound like Sylvester Stallone, but it sounds like that character I'm voicing for that book. So
Sly makes an appearance, huh? In Gory Days?
I can't say that he does, No, but I'm just using that as an example.
I
Lots
gotcha.
of times as a narrator, you're doing either a good or a bad imitation of somebody, and
but if I know who you're trying to do, then it works.
Yeah. By the way, that story where the girl band is in the theme park is called Dead Over Heels.
Oh,
So not pour some sacrificial blood on it.
So okay, all right, that works because
I'm glad I was able to clear that up.
So I was born in the 80s. I'm only familiar with it, obviously, from what I've learned on television, what I've read in books and magazines at different places like that. I happen to be a huge fan. This is so weird. I'm a huge fan of Tears for Fears. Right?
Man, that guy had some teeth, didn't he? The guy that was the guy with the mullet. He had some major league teeth in the video.
Yeah.
And that was prime MTV time. You know, the 80s were. It was before they got into all of the reality TV, and we were, as young adults, I and my wife and my friends were absolutely tuning into MTV a lot.
Yes. So so that brings up the video for you. That brings up the
yes.
That's the one in the library, right? The head over heels.
Yeah.
So well, it's an interesting thing. Have you ever seen the movie Donnie Darko?
Oh yeah.
I love that movie, and for some reason they use it in like a montage of like the school, like they're walking where we're getting to see this school, and it's like a montage, and that song is playing. And I always wanted to ask the director, it's like, why did you choose that song?
Yeah. Donnie Darko got a nice cult following, didn't it?
It really did. I came up with it. That's the thing. It came out when I was in high school. So once one person gets a hold of it and like, oh, you got to watch this, then it's like a chain reaction, you know?
Yeah. Jake Gyllenhaal, right?
Yes, sir.
Is what I'm remembering. Yeah. The 80s were a fun time. I mean, to be honest, they weren't necessarily my favorite music time, although my favorite band, Dire Straits, came to life in the 80s.
Aha.
And still a big Mark Knopfler fan, the Making Movies album of Dire Straits is probably one of my top 5 Desert Island albums.
Wow.
Along and other 80s artists. Hey, Warren Zevon had a lot of kind of creepy, funny songs, like Werewolves of London. His big hit is hilarious. When you better stay away from him. He'll rip your lungs out, Jim. Warren had a lot of that mixture going on.
So what album do I have from him? I do have an LP of Warren Zevon because my dad was a Warren Zevon fan.
Yeah.
Excitable Boy. Werewolves of London's on that, right?
That's probably my favorite. He's also got Roland the Headless Thompson Gunner on there. And Excitable Boy itself is pretty creepy song on its own,
Ooh.
Yeah.
I haven't listened to it in a little while. I started packing up some of that stuff only just for transport, not for any other reason. So I kind of put my records away just a little while ago, but now that we're in the season, like this podcast is being released in this spooky season. So now, what was that song called again?
The Excitable Boy. Both
the title.
I mean, all 3 of those, Werewolves London, Roland the Headless Thompson Gunner, and Excitable Boy are all on the album Excitable Boy. And it's that you better dig that album back out. You'll be glad you did.
Absolutely.
So, real sorry when Warren passed. That was a big loss for us, and he put an album out with everybody from REM except Michael Stipe, the singer, and they called themselves for this album Hindu love gods. And the one thing I remember from that album was they did a cover of Prince's Raspberry Beret with Warren singing. So it's pretty crazy stuff.
Is that any good?
I liked it.
Okay.
I mean, it's not something I have in my rotation all the time, but
Sure.
But it was Warren, so I had to go along with it, you know.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was in Barnes & Noble years ago. Like, it was after he had passed. And I think it was either a biography or an autobiography. I can't remember. And it had maybe you'll know, it had like a pretty crazy name, like a pretty long, crazy name.
I don't remember that biography. I'm looking on my playlist for my Warren Zevon albums, and another good album of his is called Bad Luck Streak and Dancing School. I think that maybe he had a self-titled first one. But on Excitable Boy, you've also got Lawyers, Guns, and Money, you know?
Everyone who I know who's a lawyer, it's like, oh, that's my theme song. It's like, you and every other lawyer.
Yeah. That's a good, I'm glad we brought Warren Zevon up, because that's a terrific combination of the sort of macabre and funny that totally fits with our conversation. So,
excellent.
Cool.
Yeah, and he was a young man. I just looked up. He passed at 56. Unbelievable.
Yeah, that's too young. Lung cancer, and I think he smoked for most of his adulthood. And I don't know that that's what necessarily that it was the smoking, but I know he died of lung cancer. So
yeah,
really touching rendition of "Knocking on Heaven's Door" that he did while he was pretty sick, and got a lot of help with that last album.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, all right. R.I.P. Warren Zevon. And yes, I will. I know 'tis the season. I will listen. I only listened to the full album twice after I had gotten it. So
you're in for a treat, and it's like I said, it's a great combination of the humorous and the scary, and just like what Stacey's bringing us in Gory Days.
Well, I forced myself to do this. So when I started, just a quick anecdote here. When I started the whole record collecting thing, I said to myself, because when I started DJing, it was CDs. You know what I mean? Like, that was in the early. I think I started DJing in 2000 and 2001. So it was CDs. So you had to buy all these compilations. Like, I just had crates of CDs. Well, then people said, oh, you're lucky. I used to have to carry around records. So I did not get into the vinyl record LP thing until much, much later, when they started, I guess, repressing it and on that 180 gram vinyl. And then they had Record Store Day, and we have a lot of great local record stores here in Philly. So I was like, okay, you know what I'll do is this. If I don't own an album, I'll buy it, but like, it'll have to be either like a special Record Store Day type pressing, like a numbered, this many out of 2000 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Or something that I really want that I never had, like Van Halen's 1984. I love that album, but I never actually owned it. I always listened to, there was like a best of compilation that they brought out years ago, and then a best of both worlds. So, but I never owned 1984, the album. So I finally bought it. Long story short, I got into it saying, I'm only going to buy that kind of stuff. I'm only going to buy new, because I don't want to have like a wall of records. Like, I know so many DJs do, like their entire wall is all right. I'm like, in the digital age, I can't afford to do that.
Right.
But then when I started doing that, the problem became is people just started then buying me or giving me their old records. So every time, you'd run into somebody, oh, you know what? Hold up. And then they'd give you like 3 LPs. Well, that was Warren Zevon, the Excitable Boy. It's one of those albums that my dad had either given to me or gotten me from somewhere. So I just ended up with it. So,
well, your dad is a wise man. I don't know if I've mentioned this to you, but of course, I predate all of that, and the very first recordings I bought were 45 RPM, little 45s.
Oh yeah,
and you'd put a stack of those on, and the automatic record changer would drop the next one. You're totally ruining the integrity of the recording if you have a whole stack of 45s. We did that with albums too, with LPs. Right. But the very first 45 I bought when I was 11 years old was a song called DOA by a band called Blood Rock.
Man, that sounds intense.
Yeah, well, it was about a football team whose plane crashes, and
that is intense.
Was the genesis of that song, and kind of a local connection that happened in Wichita, Kansas, which is it happened to the Wichita State football team,
the Shockers.
Yeah, and Wichita's about 3 hours away from Kansas City, so we were absolutely aware of that news, and they shut down their football program after that. So still a good basketball program, but they said we're kind of done with football.
Wow. Well,
that was my first 45.
Blood Rock. DOA.
Yeah.
Yikes.
Well,
well, what do you call it? With respect to your time, just one or two more questions.
Sure. Oh, sure. I'll go on forever.
With Gory Days, yes, we're talking about Rock and Roll Nightmares. This is the 80s edition short stories. You've heard the two authors, the great authors that did the 70s edition, and you'll hear the 60s stories as well. We are living in the 80s for this episode of the Red River Horror Podcast, speaking with the narrator of the book, Andy Garrison, who also happens to be an actor, acting coach, acting extraordinaire. You have a studio, you can do... It's amazing.
When you're acting, you got to do a lot of different things. But I love the craft, and I love part of the reason I always knew I wanted to teach. And when I decided it was acting that I wanted to teach, I didn't know that, 40 something years after I started acting, I'd still be fascinated by the craft and how it works, and passing along, what I know, and trying to warn actors away from the mistakes I've made, has been sort of my life mission. So it's a really fulfilling kind of panoply of different jobs that I do, because I edit both sound and video, and
sure.
I've done some writing, but it's not something I have to do,
Yep.
So the acting and the teaching is what I have to do,
So just to summarize Gory Days, what you'll find when you look for it: break out the guitar, throw your horn hands, get ready to rock down to Electric Avenue. Gory Days set in an alternate evil 80s where androids take the stage, a washed-up rock star discovers the secret time travel, and an aspiring musician puts her demo tape into the wrong hands.
Yeah.
And we mentioned these stories. Don't Stand So Close to Meat, Hip to Be Scared, Dead Over Heels, who of course is a play on Tears for Fears, the great Tears for Fears. So Andy, I guess just one more question for you. If you were to go back to the 80s, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's something relatable to this book, Gory Days, that you would maybe want to experience, or a person you'd like to meet, I guess, is a better way.
Who would I want to meet from the 80s? I think I'd want to, well, there aren't a whole lot of political people I'd want to meet necessarily. But of the musicians that I, was listening to, I would love to meet Mark Knopfler from Dire Straits, or and thankfully he's still with us, and I'd love to have met Warren Zevon and Linda Ronstadt. What a voice!
Yeah.
The big people in the 80s, I would love to have known what I know now about Clive Davis, the famous producer.
Sure.
Who discovered Bruce Springsteen and rap groups. And I would love to know what he was working on back then, had a conversation with him, because so much breadth in his, knowledge and what he was able to bring about. Clive Davis would have been a good meet.
Yeah.
So,
anything else you want to say about Gory Days? That's the Rock and Roll Nightmares, the 80s edition.
Sorry to interrupt. It's scary and funny. The writing is a pleasure. I can tell you that one of the reasons I so enjoy working with Stacy on her audiobooks are because the writing is it's a pleasure to read. And she carries that quality through not only her own writing work, but the other authors that she brought in and edited with. And it's for a reader, I'm having a great time, and I hope that gets passed along to the listener.
All right, everyone, that is Andy Garrison, narrator of the book. Well, it's the Rock and Roll Nightmare series, of course. Gory Days, the 80s edition short story. Let's take a trip back to the decade of excess. Andy, so great being with you today. Thanks so much for chatting, for some good audiobook chats.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Well, I really hope you enjoyed that. And this was the episode number 62 of the Red River Horror Podcast. Of course, you can reach out to us for episode suggestions, or if you want to jump on, you got something to talk about, join, redriverhorror@gmail.com. Don't forget to check out our 31 Days of Horror calendar for 31 movies to get all hyped for Halloween coming up. And remember, you can always tweet at me at Red River Joe. Join us for hashtag games, Tony Todd Tuesday, hashtag Women Horror Wednesday, hashtag Stephen King Sundays. All those good ones. Now, hey, that's all I got for you. So remember to keep traveling those channels of fear.